Good morning, everyone. If I may have your attention, please. Welcome to the Wilson Center. My name is Marissa Khurma, and I'm the director of the Middle East program here at Wilson. We are truly honored to be co-hosting today's event, a report launch with the Yazda organization, as well as the Zoverian Public Office. We are launching a second report of a two-report series focused on Sinjar, and this report is titled, "There's No Future in Sinjar Without Safety and Agency." In a few days, we'll be marking the, the 10th year anniversary of the ISIS genocide against the Yazidis. It is a very tragic commemoration, but this is a very essential discussion to be had. And we have worked with the Yazda Foundation and other Yazidi foundations and the Free Yazidi Foundation over the last few years to amplify voices of the Yazidis from the region, but also from the diaspora and the work that they do. So I'm truly delighted that we brought all the forces together again this year to discuss the content of this report, the challenges that are outlined in the report, but also the recommendations and the key about the key role that the United States and other international actors should play. It is now my pleasure to be introducing our keynote speaker for this morning, Representative Frank Wolf, who is currently a distinguished senior fellow of the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative. He previously served in the U.S. House of Representatives for 34 years, representing the 10th District of the state of Virginia. And he's the founder and co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. Representative Wolf, the floor is yours. Thank you.
I want to thank the Wilson Center for hosting this event, and Mark Green, head of the center, with whom I traveled with on one trip to Iraq when he was head of AID. I hope that positive results will come out of this gathering. I was one of the first members of Congress, along with my Chief of Staff, Dan Scanlon, to go to Iraq when the war started. We went with an NGO, traveling by car from Kuwait through Basra and north to Nasiriyah, where we spent time with our military, visiting various sites, including the hospital where Jessica Lynch had been treated. I returned to Iraq several times, traveling throughout the country, including Baghdad. Each time I traveled there, I saw the situation was getting worse. This led me to introduce the Iraq Study Group, also known as the Baker-Hamilton Commission, as was led by former Secretary of State Jim Baker and former Indiana Congressman Lee Hamilton. Many believe the war in Iraq was a mistake. History will be the judge. But the war resulted in genocide by ISIS, and it created hardships and death for many, including the Yazidi community and the Christian community in Iraq. I've been to Sinjar City, saw the devastation of the Yazidi population, the destruction of many homes and businesses. I saw the mass graves of the Yazidis. I went to Sinjar Mountain and saw the personal items strewn along the roadside that the Yazidis had discarded as they fled. I met with Yazidi leaders both in America and also in Iraq. I visited camps where Yazidis have been living, now going on 10 years. I heard the stories of those living there with little or no hope. One visit sticks out in my mind of an elderly Yazidi father with pain on his face, pleading for help, telling us the difficulties that he and his family endured every day. I met with Yazidi mothers who wept as they told the horrible stories of their daughters being taken by ISIS fighters and approximately 2,500 Yazidi women or girls are still missing today. I believe our government has failed the Yazidi people and also the Christian community. Almost 10 years have passed, and these communities still face severe difficulties. Many Yazidis have left Iraq, as you know, going to Germany, Australia, and some to the U.S., a large population in the state of Nebraska. Hopefully, as I look at each and every one of you, with the commitment of the experts here today, solutions will come out of this conference. I reach out to people who I respect, who are working in the field in Iraq, to see what they felt needs to be done to help the Yazidi community. They said that because of a big reduction in humanitarian assistance, additional funding is needed for the Yazidis to return to their homes, as the Iraqi government has plans to close down the IDP camps. Actually, they were scheduled to close down the camps at the end of the month. However, there are concerns over lack of security, damaged or destroyed homes, minimal job opportunities, and a lack of health care and education and even access to drinking water. These sources also said the Yazidis need to be given greater representation in leadership positions at the federal level in Baghdad. They're an underrepresented minority at the federal level, and hopefully increased representation will rebuild trust and result in more resources directed to Yazidi areas. After following this issue for many years, being on the ground to seeing the difficulties, let me tell you what I believe should be done, and can be done now to help the Yazidis and the other minorities. Our president should issue an executive order directing the Secretary of State to work on solving these problems quickly, as time is running out. The world is looking at Gaza. The world is looking at Ukraine. Iraq is being forgotten, and we will soon be downsizing our military presence there soon. An executive order is a directive from the President of the United States and has the same power as a federal law. Every president since George Washington has used executive orders in various ways. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was a result of 2 executive orders. Executive orders are powerful, and this would mandate, not a conference, not a discussion, not a thought, would mandate a solution. 10 years of suffering of the Yazidi community must end. I believe now is the best opportunity to improve the situation for the Yazidis and the Christians of Iraq. With the experts and influence in this gathering, I believe and pray that we can get together and come together and get this done. Thank you very much.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for starting the program off with such strong call for action, because I think that has been the frustration over some of the commemoration events over the years is coming together and then having things be the same as they were the previous year's commemoration. And so I appreciate that opportunity. I thank the Wilson Center for launching this important event, which titled "There is no," and report, "There is no future in Sinjar without safety and agency." And at the end of the day, those are really the 2 things that the Yazidi community in particular needs to be able to move forward in Iraq. And this report was authored by Yazda, the Zibigan Public Office, with support from USAID and IOM. So thank you, Marissa. Thank you, Natia, Lynn, for all the work you've done. And thank you for attending in person and those attending virtually. And that you, in spite of, as Representative Wolf said, the world looking at all these other newer conflicts and forgetting about how important the situation right now is in Iraq. And as you heard, 10 years and counting, and hardly anything has changed. Over 2,000 Yazidis are still displaced, most in camps in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Yet those camps are now closing, forcing a second displacement. 2,700 women and children still missing. Their homeland, Sinjar, remains unsafe and uninhabitable. And of course, there's been little justice. So we're going to jump right into having a conversation with the leaders, really, that have worked together in such a beautiful way to bring this back to the forefront in people's minds. They've just had a meeting with Secretary Blinken and leaders in the White House and the Defense Department, and it was really encouraging seeing him tweet out a video promising to help, for instance, help find the women and children still missing. And really, as Representative Wolf said, it's really about political will. How do we raise the political will to move towards those solutions? And I love that word, because really, we're not here to just point to all the failures, but to say, what does it look like right now on the ground, which you guys can let us know. What is the situation for the Yazidi community, and what is the way forward? And then how do we build political will to get that done? So we're going to jump right in. I'm going to quickly introduce this amazing panel of experts and friends. And I'd recommend that you follow them on Twitter, social media, Instagram, both them and their organizations, to keep up on the important work they're doing, because they really just constantly blow my mind with the substantive work they're doing. So Pari Abraham, right next to me, is the founder and executive director of Free Yazidi Foundation. They just do spectacular work on the ground. I visited their headquarters outside of Dohuk, Iraq, and it provides protection, legal aid, skills training, job placement, educational courses, livelihood programs, and so thankful for the amazing work that you do and the opportunity to partner with you. Murad Ismail is the president of the Sinjar Academy and also co-founder and former executive director of Yazda, which is one of the most important organizations as well on the ground in Iraq that started right after the genocide. And I'm fortunate to serve on the board with him for the Sinjar Academy. They started in 2021, that now has over 900 students taking classes on business, foreign languages, technology, really impactful. So appreciate, Murad, your wisdom, your leadership. And Natia Navrazov, so thankful to have you here, the new, from February, executive director of Yazda, but Yazda is not new to her. She's been in lots of different positions there and has been instrumental in so many of their most important initiatives over the past years. She also is a lawyer specializing in international law, human rights, transitional justice has been a real focus for her, and has a master's degree in international law. So it's been wonderful to see you in so many different settings being able to talk about this. So we're going to go ahead and jump in with some questions, and we've decided to have a conversation instead of having us speak to you. So I'm going to just throw some questions out to them, and while I may send the question to one of them, they all can speak in each of these issues, and hopefully we can hear their wisdom and come to some, like you said, solutions for a way forward. So Murad, let's start with you. The report that's being released today, that I hope you also have a chance to download, that really goes into detail with some recommendations, I think 9 specific ones on ways that the focus on safety and political agency in Sinjar. Can you share a little bit about the security and the political situation on the ground right now, and how has that dual administration, it being these disputed territories, how has that hurt the community?
Yeah, thank you so much for this event. Congressman, thank you so much. You've stood with the Yazidis for a very long time, and I think it's really hard to speak after you spoke. Such a powerful start for this conference. The Yazidi community and the minorities of Iraq in general have gone through a process which really the result of it is, which will lead to their existential end, I think, in both Iraq and Syria. Syria, of course, more severe. Minorities will not, I think, after ISIS episode, minorities will almost not exist in Syria, in the places of the north and northeastern Syria, the places that were the home for some of the most ancient communities in that region. The Yazidi community in Syria, from about 80,000 people, there's about 4,000 people left in Syria. In Iraq, the situation for the minorities is getting there, almost becoming very similar. The Christian communities from 1.5 million people to about 200,000 The Yazidi community, about 25% of them have left before 2014 and about 25% after 2014, which is a reduction by half of the Yazidi population in Iraq. The post ISIS 2014, of course, resulted in killing and enslavement of about 10,000 people, but also resulted into political security vacuum, which was filled by multiple actors, internally and externally. These actors really have played probably first a positive role, but then kind of transitioned to a negative role in terms of the security. So a lot of people do not feel safe to go back. They don't feel that they are, even in the cases where, let's say, Yazidis are the people who are holding the weapons to protect themselves, which I think it's one of the very important things. Going back to 2014, I think if Yazidis were armed, ISIS will not be able to take our areas in 1 hour or 2 hours. Yazidis would have been able to defend. So it's really important as we think about the future, the post-genocide and prevention, that we need to ensure that these communities have enough power. And this is could be not a very civilized area like what we did with ISIS. It's not like you live in, in DC or in Texas or in Berlin. This is a place you need to be able to respond to mega changes, geopolitical changes, like ISIS creation, for example, in Iraq and Syria. It was a very quick thing. You can, and potentially could happen again. And we don't know what's going to happen in northeast Syria. We don't know what's going to happen in Iraq. We don't know how Iraqi government, we really don't know the vision that Iraq is in right now. And I think one of the key issues is you don't know what Iraq wants to be. I've been thinking about it. What's the best way to put this forward? What Iraq wants to be. Does it want to be a place where everybody lives in dignity? Does it want to be a state of law and rule of law? Or does it want to be this country with partially a state and partially a parallel state run by militias, run by people who make billions of dollars off of oil? Political parties selling oil to make money. Militias are in hundreds of thousands, getting millions of dollars, billions of dollars. Even they are forming companies. So you don't know. Does Iraq want to be that or this? So it's really, I'm not clear. I personally think Iraq has another wave of whatever you call it. Could be as bad as Afghanistan with Taliban, could be as less bad, could be something in between. I don't know. But I don't see the current vision, taking Iraq to a very prosperous future. And it's very sad because I know a lot of us work on this, and the people of Iraq have worked on this. So a lot of militias were basically created post-ISIS to respond to ISIS. The state never dealt with this situation. This is kind of a built-up. So, Turkey now conducting airstrikes in Sinjar. They are expanding their operations. We don't know how far will they come to Sinjar one day. We don't know what will be the position of the U.S. government, on the SDF areas. These changes, these big changes, usually they bring a genocide, ethnic cleansing, or something like that. When you have a shift in the geopolitical position of these mega powers or regional powers, usually vacuums get created, and then what breaks, the weakest point breaks, who are, I think, will be against the minorities or whoever's left from the minorities. Of course, they don't also listen to the people. So one of the things, for example, Sinjar agreements, like everywhere we go, they say, well, Sinjar agreement this is the Sinjar agreement, and it's like it is the solution. None of us it was never discussed with us. The goal of the Sinjar agreement wasn't the people, wasn't the Sinjar, wasn't the prevention, wasn't the future. The goal of Sinjar agreement was essentially to fix these geopolitical differences and political differences inside Iraq, the geopolitical differences outside Iraq. But the question wasn't the people. And, to me as a human being, when something like this level happens, the question is, first, you protect these people, you make sure they are safe, you make sure they will be able to prevent such atrocities in the future. The goal is not a political, we are not there to make Turkey happy. We are not there to make Baghdad happy or Iran happy or PMF or KDP or PUK or PKK or all these names. We are not there to make them happy. But the agreement is to try to sort something. The other thing, Iraq does not have, let's say, one policy for the state to deal with all the militias. So it's again, let's say they want to get rid of the Yazidi YBS. There's at least 300,000 armed Iraqis. and everybody knows a lot of them are politically affiliated. Why you go after the weakest community and the weakest group in the country? You need to have a policy for all. That post-war a situation was developed, we need to bring all this 300,000, 400, 500,000. But in some places, they are strengthening them and they are trying to weaken us in Sinjar. You know, like, for example, we do not want PKK in Sinjar, but we do not want YBS to be considered as PKK. That's another thing. And I think that's something, so for example, as the international community, do you consider the YBS as a PKK? They tell us no. And then you go to Turkey, they bomb them and kill them, but nobody says, no, don't do that. But also Iraq doesn't want to bring this in. You know, Sinjar Agreement said remove these people. Well, you know, there are 4,000 fighters with their families. Where do you take them? Do you dump them over the border to somewhere? Mm. You know, it's just really this lack of practicality. And a lot of it, I think it's happening in Washington, D.C., where let's say, you know, I just got my PhD, I got a position in the State Department or even in Congress, but I've never been on the ground. I don't know the situation on the ground. Then I make agreements, I make deals, and then I support deals. I go with the flow. But these things are not practical. You know, we need a practical solution for Sinjar. U.S. should press Iraq to create a structure to bring everybody in. So no militias, no political security. That's the key. Second, administration. I think we want Sinjar and no plains to be two provinces because they just don't give us the budget. They don't give us the support. You know, you go to Sinjar, you see what you see. You go to Mosul, which is now trying to be the next Dubai. So you will have a next Dubai close to, you know, just like few kilometers away from mass graves. They don't pay money to exhume them. You know, honestly, it's just really, I don't know even how to have a discussion with being just so angry. Sorry.
No, thank you. It's you provide really good context. Anyone else want to?
No, I can. I mean, you know, I think we're all three thinking like, of course, 10 years later, it is very frustrating to see that we're not moving forward. Maybe like small steps are being made, but I feel like many times when we make those steps forward, we take a few back as well because there's something happening again. I agree with Murad that our people, it seems like they do not want to stay in Iraq. And I had yesterday, together with Murad and Natia, the conversation with the KRG and the Iraqi government that you need to win the hearts of the Yazidis back. Our people were neglected on the 3rd of August. You did not do what you were supposed to do as a government. When it comes to protection, taking care of your people, finding your people, you didn't do that on the 3rd of August and you didn't do it 10 years later. There's a lot of resentment within the Yazidi community. Most of the time we look outward and see if the international community can support us. But that's not the solution, right? We need to make sure that in Iraq, the people of Iraq are loved and the citizens of Iraq are there to live and have a future. None of the Yazidis see that. There's many of the people, of our people that want to go back to Sinjar, but they just don't feel safe. They don't feel like there's any incentive from the government to make it a better place for our community. There are other ideas to make it better for other reasons, but our community is not the priority. And I think that we all feel that 10 years later, that like it's getting frustrating. We are demanding this, this, and this, and why isn't it happening? I think also aside from the report that Yazda is bringing out, also Yazda, Sinjar Academy, and the Free Yazidi Foundation brought out the 10 years after genocide, the Yazidi struggle to recover and overcome. This is a policy paper, and I hope everyone can read this. The idea is that governments around the world, and even the Iraqi and the Kurdish government, can use this as a guiding document of like, what do the Yazidis want? And believe me when I say that many of the thoughts that are in here are from Natia, Murad, and myself, but they're from our community. It's what our community thinks. Also, there's many times it has come up that the Iraqi government wants to close down the camps. This has been a big issue because on one side you have Yazidis, they want to go back, doesn't matter, we do not want to lose our land. Totally understandable. But the return of our people needs to be voluntary, dignified, and safe. When our people are offered $1,300 and you think it costs $300 to go from the camp, bring your belongings back to Sinjar. So you have $1,000 left. It is just not realistic to expect from our people to go back with that little bit of amount. It is not well thought about. But we are here in DC to make sure that this policy paper is read, people use this as a guiding document, but also that something is being done for our people. And meeting the Secretary of State, conveying the situation of our people, hoping that the US government will continue its support, but also continue to pressure Iraq and KRG to do something for our people.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything Murad and Pari just said. Maybe just to add that, and we also raised this in the White House yesterday, the response to ISIS, has been mainly military. This is what we have been seeing in the ground. And of course, as a terrorist group, ISIS needed to be defeated. The territories needed to be taken back. But this was just the first step. We needed more. And because there wasn't more, all of the issues Yazidis have been facing for over 10 years are still present, are still happening right now. So, and our policy paper also points to that. I think what we really need from Iraq and KRG, with the support of the international community, is a proper transitional justice legal framework. Like the Sinjar Agreement is on security, administration, reconstruction. UNITAD was created to work on justice and accountability. The Yazidi survivors law is a reparations law. But all of that happen in a way isolated from each other. What we really need is a proper holistic legal framework where all the components of transitional justice are brought together. So criminal accountability, truth-telling. We need the truth. That's something that, the community always asks us. What happened on 3rd of August? How come that, ISIS took so quickly so much territory? So we need answers to that. And then reparations, of course. The Yazidi survivors law is already a good step, but we need to build on that. And beyond that, what is really, really missing are guarantees of non-repetition. Like, people are asked to go back, but nothing guarantees that another genocide will not happen in 5, 10, 2 years. So how can we push people back to a crime scene? Sinjar is still full of mass graves, at least 33 mass graves that are still not exhumed, plus kill sites that, we are not even able to assess. So many we have. And they're, pushed back to there where, the trauma is also still present. So I really believe that, Iraq, KRG needs to work with the US and other countries. And we have examples of transitional justice processes which were, successful in Latin America, in Colombia, it's a really good example, in South Africa. So take lessons learned from that and apply it to Iraq just to break this cycle of violence, which has been ongoing.
So right now, I know tomorrow was supposed to be the date for the, or was it today, that the IDP camps were supposed to be closed. So that has been delayed. Mm-hmm. What is the option when they close for the community if Sinjar isn't ready to accept them? What happens to the 200,000 that are still in the camps?
I think a lot of people are trying to get out. I see a lot of our staff members, a lot of the Yazidis in the camps, they're saving their money to get out. Mm-hmm. Anywhere, Europe, any of the countries, anyone who wants to help and support, migrate them to a different country, whether it's the US, Australia, Canada, they're all looking forward to one of those opportunities. And I don't blame them. You see everyone sitting here. Nobody's afraid to be shot dead, right? Nobody's afraid that there will be a explosion right now. And I feel like also when there is daily hatred against our people, discrimination. People do not feel happy when, if I sit here and I know that over half of you does not want to eat any food that we would prepare, how can we live in the same society? People understand that. My people know that. And there is a reason why our people are remaining in the camps, because they're looking to move outward. If there's any way that my people would feel that anyone cares about them, maybe they would stick around. Maybe they would want to go back and rebuild their lives. But they don't see that, and they lose hope.
So really, ultimately, the Iraqi government and the KRG need to step up. And we know the budget, I think I was doing the calculation, is less than 0.01% of the Iraqi budget on rebuilding Sinjar. So with that, and in the meantime, Mosul and other places have been rebuilt. And so what can the U.S. government do in particular? What kind of recommendations would you say to help? I know part of it is raising political will in Iraq and the political will here in the U.S., as Representative Wolf talked about, to put pressure to use the different levers we have. Lots of money still goes to Iraq. I mean, how can the U.S. government do better to support the Yazidi community, and how could those watching and those involved help build political will to be able to stand for your community?
I think it's a multifaceted approach that needs to be taken and should have been taken, years ago, not just now. So 10 years, no accountability, only 10 trials out of about 1 million crime, to start with that. Amnesty for ISIS members now in Iraq and Syria is getting discussed. The evidence that were collected, one with about $120 million, will be thrown through a window, or will be at a UN institution that nobody will look at it. To start with that. So Yazidis, when you ask them, say, I want justice, I want justice. A lot of Yazidis don't really understand, a normal Yazidi, let's say in one of the villages, who does not understand what really genocide recognition is. But in his mind, a genocide recognition will lead to a lot of steps, and this will be recovery, will be followed by protection, international protection. If something happened to the Yazidis, somebody will come for the rescue. So it's really even the perception of what genocide is, like, it has not been conveyed to the Yazidi community. So there's no recognition inside Iraq to what happened on a very shallow, thin basis. And that get eroded with one thing. Just was last year, some Yazidis and some Muslims, they had some issues in Sinjar. Some people throw some stones to it. And like in 2 hours, you had like 50 religious clerks. They came on the members and they said Yazidis should all, ISIS should have done they should have completed what they started. It was like in one minute we lost all the sympathy that was for us. In 1 minute we lost all the support, and we again were the people who were devil worshippers, people who were not clean, people who were this and that. So that has to be dealt with it. The other thing is, if you want to take people back, you do not just, it's not a political decision. You need to put money in it. So if you are putting all your money in Mosul, but you don't want any money to go to Sinjar, if you are putting all your money to Anbar, where ISIS family members are taking repression from the state, and then Yazidis who were killed in the genocide have not taken a single dollar from the state. About 2,000 Yazidis who were killed in the genocide, not even 2% of them have got repression from the state. Yazidis have filed 20,000 claims for the repressions. None of them have got repressions, but the people in Mosul, they get it. In Anbar, in Ramadi, they get it. In Tikrit, they get it. So, you talk about that, and, Yazidis are not stupid, and nobody's stupid. You see that. So you read signals. So August 3rd is coming in 3 days. Iraq does not have a plan for even a commemoration event. There's a commemoration event in Sinjar that nobody will go to it. So, you read that. We are not stupid people. I mean, or at least we've learned a little bit over the past 10 years. We know how things work, how geopolitics work. So, we don't see that will in Iraq that they want the Yazidis in. So the question then become, will we be like the Jewish people? We just leave Iraq? The difference here, Israel took the Jews back in the day. But we don't have anybody that's taking us. I think if we had a Yazidi state somewhere, we would just ask them collectively to take us. It's really, we're having this, I would say, intellectual process, try to intellectually or mentally process this information, and these things that we see, they don't look good, and then people, what happens? People won't just make enough money and leave, and this is what happened. 125,000 Yazidis have left. I think every day we see at least a couple of families go to airport, try to leave, and even for us trying to defend the Yazidis to stay in Iraq, people don't like us anymore. They say, instead of you going talk to the Americans about protection of Sinjar, talk to Americans about taking us out. About issuing more visas. Honestly, that's what one thing we see on our community, and we have to bring it up here,
Well, also just to add to what Murad just said, like So there's this article, a law that was passed in 2009, Article 20. So Murad was just saying that tens of thousands of Yazidis have applied to that law. They submitted the forms. This is a law that provides any reparations for if you had you were involved in a terrorism attack, or there was a family member of yours was killed during the war, etc. None of these claims have been gone anywhere. So they're just sitting there on the desk. And so here you see Iraq has a specific law already in place. What you do see is Mosul is being rebuilt. People are getting their claims. But Yazidis from Sinjar, they're not getting their claims, and Sinjar is not being rebuilt. There's just an obvious, it's just very visible that Yazidis are not wanted, and others, straight to say, Muslims are wanted. And that's very dangerous. Ethnic and religious minorities in Iraq are all leaving. Natia, you wanted to add something?
Very briefly, I think what the U.S. could also do, I mean, we hear all these big sums being sent by the U.S. to Iraq. And again, as Murad said, Yazidis from Shingal are not operating in that sphere. They will hear these numbers and they will come to us and they will tell us, oh, you got all that money. Like, where is that money? What is happening? Because we don't see a lot of differences in the ground. So I think we need to be very careful about communicating on these things. And when we do, really explain where this money went to. And I think, we all know that in Iraq there's a lot of corruption. So we need to make sure that there's proper vetting, a proper process. And I'm sure there already is, but just reinforce that because we know that, corruption continues and that a lot of this money does not reach the people it is meant to support. And all the three of us have, very strong and trustworthy grassroots NGOs. And, we are right now, all the three of us struggling with funding when all of the issues that our communities are facing are still present. So I think, we really need continuous support on that. And I just want to highlight on the Sinjar commemoration, as Murad said, there is a commemoration for the first time where 48 NGOs came together and going to commemorate the genocide in Shingal. And when we ask diplomatic community or Iraqi KRG officials if they're going to come, they say no. And when we ask why, they said for security. So how can they not, they are not coming because of security, and then they're closing the camps and asking people to go back. So I think it's a very absurd situation.
For sure, and it's so frustrating to think that there won't be that rallying around the community in Sinjar 10 years after, but the fact that the security is the excuse that the government officials themselves are using to not come, when the very people that could correct it are using it as an excuse. I think the report that's being released today makes some really key policy recommendations, and really the real focus is enable high participation participatory public administration, which is Yazidis having a say in security and in governance themselves, and goes through 9 different points to do that. I know, this. Is this something that the Secretary, I mean, you had an amazing conversation with the Secretary of State, and obviously I'm sure some of your meetings were private, but is there some political will there to put pressure on Iraq to do better for your community, to get any sense from the meetings that you were in that there might be a moment now with it being 10 years and things being so bad that there could be international community pressure on Iraq from both the U.S. and others to push for a better way forward?
So I think U.S. is supportive to the Yazidis, but does not press enough, and that's also the case for the Europeans, where the international community does not press Iraq enough. Usually, the high, the tier 1, interest or the international relations between the countries overshadow these other small things with human rights. That's in every conflict. Human rights is like probably the 3rd or the 4th pillar in the policy. So, we tried to ask the U.S., and over the years, U.S. very supportive to the Yazidis over multiple governments, but it doesn't go far enough, It's like we need to press Iraq on some strong decisions, All the Iraqi money goes through the U.S. system, a lot of the U.S. has a lot of influence over Iraq, and, we should put some boundaries. You say, well, if you're a country that a minority cannot live, if you're a country where where mass graves are laying just few kilometers from a city that you want to make Dubai. This is not acceptable. There are some things I think sometimes you have to practice some strength. And U.S. did not practice strength in Iraq. That's why there's this whole other militias taking over Iraq. Iraq is no longer is really a place that kind of reversed the order, in a way. And a lot of it goes back to the U.S. Weaker position in Iraq. And for me, it's very worrying about what U.S. will do in Iraq and Syria. And I think if U.S. to leave Iraq and Syria, which I see. I'm a U.S. citizen. I know I'm here in the politics. I understand it. I think there's just less interest in the region, less interest in supporting the situation both in Iraq and Syria. But a U.S. withdrawal from these areas will bring a lot of hurdle. And U.S. sometimes does not realize how significant its decisions are.
Right.
You remember when in Afrin, for example, U.S. withdrew from Afrin, and there was ethnic cleansing and genocide in Afrin, like within a day.
And now there's more instability, and really what you're talking about, the human rights, and promoting this cohesion of society where everyone is accepted with the same human dignity, where Yazidis, Christians, Shias, Sunnis all can live together peacefully. That's a win for Iraq. That's how you build a society that is prosperous. That's how you build peace and stability. And but obviously there's so many actors there that are looking for themselves. But obviously this is the way forward for them. I know the other component, the little time we have left, would be the lack of accountability and justice. I know is a heavy burden for the community. So many of my friends in the community still struggle with the fact that there's been so little. I know, Natia, you've really been pushing, all of you have been on this. What can the Iraq do now to help further justice for the Yazidi community?
Yeah. Justice for the Yazidi community is very, very important. And justice in the broader sense, not just criminal accountability, but also reparations, opening mass graves, looking for the missing. Yazidis have been, historically persecuted for generations and generations. We all have stories of massacres. And I do believe that's why, Yazidi have this strong sense of justice. In terms of Iraq's responses has been very disappointing. And actually, I would go further and even say the response of the international community. Because when you have a group like ISIS, where people from 80 plus countries joined, committed all these crimes, documented them, had very strong propaganda, you would think that, there will be at least an international court that would prosecute them. And this is what we all asked for. The three of us from the very beginning were asking for that. All we got is in Iraq terrorism trials. So ISIS members are just being prosecuted for terrorism, membership to a terrorist group. Survivors are not aware, are not involved. Often the perpetrators even clearly mention that they enslaved Yazidis, and this is completely disregarded. The only thing we got from the international community are two things. One is, and I'll start with that, like a few trials in Germany. As Murat said, in 10 years so far, we had 9 trials in Germany. So only Germany so far has prosecuted ISIS members for international crimes. And then we had the creation of UNITAD, which is a UN investigative team that was set up by the Security Council to document the crimes. And documentation of the crimes is very important, but it's only meant to be a first step to prosecution. But what Iraq decided last September is to close UNITAD. So UNITAD is being closed and will close in a month and a half, so by the 17th of September. And still until now, we don't know if the evidence that UNITAD collected will be accessible to continue at least these prosecutions by third states like Germany and others, which are willing to do that. So that's very worrying. So I think Iraq needs to communicate to the survivors and to the communities what is their plan post-September. And in that plan, we need to be consulted, we need to be involved, because what is missing now is really the component of trust. There is a draft law right now that Iraq wants to pass to criminalize genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, which is a really good step. But I always say, even if this legislation passes tomorrow, no survivor that I know will go and participate in these proceedings in Iraq because they don't trust. They don't trust the government. They always ask for international involvement. And the trust is, again, also linked to the security issues. ISIS is still present in Iraq. Some of the survivors I know of receive threats quite regularly on social media. They're being contacted. But beyond that, ISIS was joined by a lot of the Yazidi neighbors. And the Iraqi society is very tribal. So if some of the survivors do participate in these trials, they will have some retaliation and there will be security risks. So there is a strong demand for a strong witness protection. Iraq needs to tell us what's going to happen after September with UNITAD's evidence. If this legislation is passed, we need to be consulted. And then in parallel, trust building needs to happen. And witness protection is just one element of that.
Can I just add a few more
Yes.
things? I'll end with the just and accountability, but I just want to quickly go back to the meeting with the Secretary of State. What we basically conveyed to the Secretary of State is that Iraq is a middle-income country. It has $153 billion budget this year and last year. $153 billion, and the people are living in tents for 10 years. So we wanted to push for a 1% of this amount of money to rebuild Sinjar. Aside from that, Iraq wants to portray itself as being able to be a normal country where nothing is wrong. So they choose to end the mandate of UNITAD, the UN investigative mechanism, and there are talks about ending UNAMI in Iraq. This all to show that Iraq is a normal country, but I always give the example of like, okay, if you refuse to add a hospital in a city, you will not know how many people are sick. So, is that the way Iraq wants to continue? Pretend as if nobody has issues in Iraq. Iraq seems very fine. That's not a way forward. This is just hurting our community and other minorities who suffered immensely from Islamic State. When it comes to justice and accountability, I just want to also highlight something. Since we're in the U.S. and since we're U.S. citizens, the U.S., there was a case here in the U.S. and in France against Lafarge. Yazda and the Free Yazidi Foundation are civil party to the case in France. In France, if Lafarge is found guilty, then probably the organizations will get a symbolic €50 just to, yeah, it's sad, you know, what happened to the Yazidis, and here's €50 for to compensate. It's just very symbolic. In the U.S., Lafarge pled guilty because they were paying off ISIS members. So they pled guilty, and the fine was $770 million. We're now pushing the U.S. government and the Department of Justice to make sure that this amount of money, some of it at least goes to the survivors, that they can rebuild their lives. Normally, it would just go into the treasury. And, I mean, Lafarge is pleading guilty, but the money is because they used dollars, so it touched the U.S. banking system, and it's not allowed to pay terrorist organizations. So just to give you the idea of, like, you know, there's other ways to get justice and accountability. Mm-hmm. And one of them is also who were the ideological funders of the Islamic State. So we're not only talking about foot soldiers, but or Lafarge, like companies that continued their work and made payoffs to ISIS. It's also who were the ideological funders of the Islamic State, who thought that this was good for ISIS to do and eradicate Yazidis and other minorities. It's key for the prevention of future genocide against our community to make sure that those who funded the Islamic State structure are held accountable, and that's the work that we're trying to do as well.
Okay. Well, we have to close up. I don't know if anyone has anything quick to say that they didn't get to say so far. I want to thank you for all three of you for your leadership. I know I just hard making eye contact with them when we're talking about these topics because it's so painful. There's so much trauma being carried and so little political will that we've seen. But I'm still convinced that there is a way forward. And I think that these reports that we talked about today lay that out. So I really recommend that all of you, as I mentioned earlier, you follow each of these leaders on social media, you follow their companies, their organizations, and you download these reports and see how we could better support their community as we push and hopefully take it. I'm hopeful that this has been a moment where there's been some political will in Washington with these meetings. There's been some encouraging things said that we can build on that, and hopefully we can see some movement in the next year, as you mentioned, for the U.S. government to stand up, in particular, although we know that this is Iraq's fault per se, but the U.S. to stand and push Iraq and for Iraq to find the political will to do the right thing. And for those of us that can support your communities, as they said, they're all struggling to have the funding to meet all the needs before them. So for those of us that are connected with organizations that help come alongside them, I'd highly recommend that. So thanks again for joining us. We're going to hand it back over to Marissa. Oh, Lynn is going to go now. Lynn Zavigian, oh my goodness, I'm so excited that she is now joining us to give remarks. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us from Lebanon. I know you've been the force behind this event and all the work that you've done to put this report together, to come alongside this community. I know that you've organized these commemoration events over the years and have been just a strong voice for the community. We'll hand it off to you, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Nadine, and thank you to my friends who are on stage, Natia, Murad, and Pari. And thank you very much to Representative Wolf and Marissa and the Wilson Center team for having us. I join you from Beirut. I would have loved to be with you in Washington. And I would like to share some closing remarks to really amplify the critical messages, the indispensable messages that our Yazidi friends have shared with us today. I'd like to begin by making very clear that everything that we have heard teaches us that Sinjar is still a conflict zone. It is still unsafe. There is tremendous uncertainty. There is no clear plan, budget, and will. And so what could a future look like when none of the basic elements that any human race, civilization, and community deserves is not on the table? And the ailment that we bring to all of our US stakeholders today is that with the very few steps that have been taken for Sinjar, the Yazidis are not being included in the decisions that are being taken on their lives and on their future. Decisions are being made for the people that you see in front of you on stage today. They have no voice. We are asking for agency, and we are asking for the US government to make it a priority, to make that happen, and voice that necessity to the Iraqi and Kurdistan regional governments, because we know how close those three governments are together. So that is the ask on the table today. You have heard today tremendous frustration and disappointment, and I would like to contextualize what that means for our three Yazidi friends on this stage today, because in just 4 days, they are going to be taken back in time to the first day of yet another genocide against their people. I would like to make clear that although these three leaders are so collected and so eloquent, they are hurting, and they are being triggered and re-triggered with trauma and anger, and having to respond to hate crimes, having to respond to insult, and having to still show up on this stage and on other stages globally without taking offense, with still being able to keep it together. I want to just remark how extraordinary that effort is. It is superhuman. We are clearly asking for far too much. And I can only imagine what our 2,600 women and girls and boys who are still enslaved, who are still in re-education camps, who are still being held by Daesh militants, what life is like for them every single day. it's important to remember that Daesh is not over. So what we are modeling here is what inclusion and what dialogue looks like. We need this in Baghdad, and we need this in Erbil. So we are asking Washington, D.C. to help make that possible. And we cannot continue without the United States really stepping up for us, and most importantly, with us, because that is what we are asking. We are saying to do it hand in hand with the Yazidi people, especially, for example, the three leaders on stage here today. I need to also put an important reminder on the table, because we have heard some very big statements, and I need to make very clear that I have another ask, which is the personal security of our speakers, because they need to safely speak. And we all in the world need to comprehensively learn. When any of them fly back into Baghdad or Erbil, they need to be able to do so safely. We should not hear of any arbitrary arrests, harassment, bullying, and certainly no hate speech or any violent crime being committed against these Yazidi leaders and any other Yazidi that has the courage and still the stamina to speak up. And so I ask that our American allies in the room also make sure that while we are here to speak about the collective security, the collective safety, the collective safe representation of the community, and the collective path towards justice, that we also ensure the personal security of our three friends on stage here today. And I would like to end by saying thank you. Thank you for holding space. Thank you for modeling what dialogue and what eloquent and professional and technical representations and discussion looks like, because that ask is not an unreasonable ask to be making. It is the human ask that is a right for every Yazidi survivor, community member, and leader to be making today. I thank you, and I yield the floor.
Thank you so much, Lynn, for this reminder, and thank you for joining us from Beirut. I am truly honored now to be introducing our closing keynote speaker, Ambassador Rashad Hussain, Ambassador at Large at the Office of International Religious Freedom. Ambassador Hussain serves as Principal Advisor to the Secretary as well as to the President on religious freedom conditions and policy, and leads the department's effort to monitor religious freedom, abuses, persecution, and discrimination worldwide. Ambassador Hussain.
Good morning. One of the most significant honors and awesome responsibilities as well as a public servant is the opportunity to wake up every day and to work on issues that align with our values as human beings, as those who are sworn to uphold our Constitution and our constitutional values. And I cannot think of a more appropriate example of this work than our partnership with our friends on the efforts to address the Yazidi genocide. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you for being here, and more importantly, for all the work that you are doing, for all of your leadership. I know in a time of frustration, disappointment, and anger, and with a sense of urgency for more that needs to be done. And part of our responsibility as we do our work and as we go to bed at night, and sometimes are interrupted because we hear about situations in the world where we need to do more. And we realize that every hour that we spend, every minute that we spend in getting to that work of doing more can cost individuals their lives. And we saw that in 2014, and we continue to see that today. And we see that in many parts of the world. So I want to thank you. I want to thank the Wilson Center for inviting me here to join you in marking this solemn anniversary. I want to thank Nadine Manza, our good friend, for her tremendous leadership and for leading today's discussion, and to our dear friend, Congressman Frank Wolf, for his leadership going far back for decades in being one of the pioneers for establishing the International Religious Freedom Office, in passing the International Religious Freedom Act, and then continuing his work most recently as a commissioner on the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom, and of course to our long-standing Yazidi partners and friends, Murad, Pari, and Natia, and to Lynn for her long-term support for the community's efforts. And I hear, it just hits me in the heart when I hear the sincerity that you bring to the issues that you're working on. I can try to say that I can relate to this idea of knowing what it's like to go to work every day and really working on issues that are so close to your heart, and knowing that there's not even a separation between when you're working and when you're free, because it's always with you in every second of the day. And we see that in trying to address the suffering of people all around the world. So I want to thank you for all of your efforts. I'd like to express appreciation and admiration to the Yazda organization, the Zavigian Public Office, and to the writers and the contributors whose research and analysis made today's report possible. I especially want to convey my respect and gratitude to the Yazidi survivors who shared their own painful experiences with researchers who are working on the report. It takes a special kind of strength, and Lynn spoke about this very eloquently, after surviving the horrors of war and genocide, to be able to speak about the experiences to others with an eye toward the future. And as is evident in today's new report, there is no future in Sinjar without safety and agency. Your insight and your advocacy is absolutely vital to those of us at the Office of International Religious Freedom, our colleagues across the State Department, and the wider foreign policy community. Although the days surrounding ISIS's brutal invasion into Sinjar and Nineveh preceded my time as Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, I am grateful to the International Religious Freedom Office, to Mariah Mercer and others who were around at the time, and who had the honor of standing with our partners from those very first 24 hours. I remember at the time being involved in some of our efforts in the United States government to address ISIS, their brutality, their atrocities, and of course we've spoken about the military operations. We were also involved in working with partners around the world, credible partners who could address the messaging of ISIS, and pointing out, including some of our partners in the Muslim world, that what ISIS was doing and continues to do is completely inconsistent with Islamic principles, although they've cloaked themselves in the garb of Islam, or have sought to do so. And we know, from the very simple principle, la ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in religion to engage in the types of atrocities that they have engaged in, is completely against the teachings and is abhorrent to so many Muslims around the world. So in doing this work, I'm honored to share the stage today with Murad, who was among those Yazidis in the United States who set aside their own grief and sorrow to meet up with our staff and others in the Secretariat across the State Department, and who did so from that time, and to help us understand the depths of the horrors facing their people and to urge us to immediate action. 10 years after ISIS's horrifying and brutal genocide, the circumstances described in this report, and which our partners from the Yazidi, Christian, other religious and ethnic components across Iraq have corroborated remain very deeply concerning. More than 1 million Iraqis remain displaced inside Iraq, including about 300,000 Yazidis. 2,600 Yazidis remain missing and unaccounted for, mostly women and girls. Just a week ago, we learned of the discovery of yet another mass grave in Tel Afar, a horrifying reminder that the work of accountability is far from over. We must work to ensure that all Yazidis who remain missing are found and finally brought home. We hear the voices of the community loud and clear. Security and agency are necessary requirements which are so far unmet for the safe, voluntary, and dignified return of hundreds of thousands of Yazidis to their homes and villages in Sinjar. The State Department continues to encourage the government of Iraq and the Kurdistan Regional Government to work in consultation and in partnership with local communities, including Yazidis. The corrosive presence of Iran-backed PMF groups, political disputes between the government of Iraq and the Kurdistan Regional Government, and other dynamics continue to frustrate and impede efforts to meet these conditions. And it is clear that in addition to these security and political challenges, far more work remains to address the underlying biases, bigotries, and religious exclusion that inform the rise of ISIS and keep Yazidis, Christians, Kakais, Turkmen, and other marginalized communities on the social and religious sidelines in Iraq to this day. The recommendations of today's report, in fact, call for just such an effort to take, quote, all necessary steps to deinstitutionalize prejudice, discrimination, and violence towards minorities and communities. Protection for vulnerable ethnic and religious communities in Iraq has always been a priority for the State Department. Since 2018, the United States has provided more than $500 million in assistance to religious and ethnic minority communities that were targeted for genocide in Iraq and Syria. Like many of you here today, I long to see Iraq achieve its real potential, prosperous, democratic, and free. It's my hope that the United States can continue to be a force and assist and empower Yazidis and members of other communities who suffered at the hands of the ISIS genocide to help create safety while fostering and protecting the agency of people in Sinjar. Finally, I conclude by taking a moment to honor the memory of the thousands of Yazidis lost to the genocide and to recognize their pain, their suffering, and the remarkable resilience of those who have survived and those who have persevered. Every one of those lost or missing represented a father, a mother, a son, a daughter, an aunt, uncle, cousin, friend, or neighbor, a precious life taken by the ferocious hatred of a terrorist group. We mourn their passing and remember them with renewed dedication and purpose to seek justice, accountability, and restoration for those they left behind. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hussein, for your heartfelt remarks. We thank all of you for attending today, and for those of you who tuned in virtually. The report that was in discussion today is on our website if you want to download it. There's also an article that was published on our new platform, MENA 360, that summarizes the report. And we hope to continue this important conversation. And I thank you, Nadine, for moderating this discussion. And thank you to Natia, Murad, and Perry for also being here today. And Lynn, I hope that you can join us in person next time. Thank you so much for your leadership and efforts. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.